Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw here on TVP World. Europe might have to hurry up in bolstering its own defenses. The United States is considering moving weapons and troops from Europe to the Indo-Pacific. The implications for Central and Eastern Europe could be huge. Potentially half of the U.S. troops stationed in the region since Russia's full-scale invasion could be withdrawn or redeployed. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. EU-Ukraine Council deepens cooperation and advances reform. After Ramadan, anti-government protests resume in Turkey. And in record time, a new German coalition is formed. We start off tonight with security in Europe. The United States is considering removing thousands of troops from the continent as it continues to shift its focus on the Indo-Pacific. Our Europe correspondent Alex Kyiv has the latest from Brussels.
Well, the possibility for the United States to remove up to 10,000 troops from the European continent is a cause for grave concern for military leaders across the continent. No less than the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, Chris Cavoli, the outgoing SACEUR at NATO, said himself that he had been consistent in recommending that the US does not pull out troops from Europe because of the Russian threat following Russia's invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. Nevertheless, we have seen the Pentagon considering this movement of troops, which falls under a broader theme in that Washington is shifting its interest from the security of the European continent to pushing its forces more into the Indo-Pacific theater. Certainly something that will be a concern for those European military leaders, for European leaders. To give you a sense of scale, 10,000 troops is the entire US contingent in Poland. Now, it's not suggesting for a second that all of those troops would be taken out, but that gives you a sense of scale. 10,000 out of 84,000 on the European continent could be removed from Europe. That will be a grave cause for concern. At the moment, these are just plans, these are just considerations from the Pentagon, but something that will certainly worry the US's European allies. Alex Kyiv, TVP World, Brussels.
We need to remember that this particular move has been agreed upon with NATO allies, including Poland, many, many months ago. Actually before the last year's NATO summit in Washington. So it was not the Trump administration who actually pushed towards a reduction of this particular deployment. It was the Biden administration.
And for more on this, coming up after the program is On the Record with Adam Yasser, his guest Marek Świerczewski, defense analyst at Polityka Insight. They discuss investment and the modernization of Poland's armed forces, so stay tuned. Please do not look for ulterior motives here, said Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski when asked about the redeployment of American military personnel and equipment away from Jasionka. Located near the Polish city of Rzeszów and close to the Ukrainian border, Jasionka has become a key logistics hub for military aid to Ukraine.
The fact that the hub in Jasionka, through which almost all aid to Ukraine passes, will be taken over by NATO, that is, also by the United States, but in a slightly smaller proportion than the national support of the US, has been known for many months, and these soldiers are staying in Poland. Please do not look for ulterior motives here. This was one of the decisions of the Washington summit last year, and this doesn't indicate any change in American policy.
A team of Ukrainian experts will travel to the United States in the coming week to discuss the technicalities of a controversial mineral deal between the two countries. The announcement was made by the Ukrainian Prime Minister in Brussels after talks with EU officials on military support, battlefield updates, and financial aid. We're now joined live by our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins from the Belgian capital. Good evening, Angela. Now, what can you tell us about the minerals deal?
Yes, so we heard from the Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal in Brussels today after those high-level talks with EU officials that a team of experts will soon be travelling to the US to discuss the technicalities of a mineral deal between Washington and Kyiv. It comes off the back of media reports suggesting that US President Donald Trump wants first dibs on any minerals that are extracted out of Ukraine. We also heard from that Kyiv official. He really stressed that this is a partnership agreement and he does not want Ukraine's accession to the EU to be endangered or jeopardized by this deal. So let's take a listen to that leader.
Technical negotiations will go through this weekend, next week, and then we'll see the results. After this negotiations, we are quite optimistic because we should find solutions.
Without Chinese support, Russia wouldn't be able to wage the war in the amount that they are waging this. So we see that 80% of the dual-use goods are actually entering Russia via China. We also see the North Korean troops present in Ukraine and the military equipment coming from North Korea to Ukraine, to Russia.
And now we go to Ukraine, where the country's commander-in-chief of the armed forces says that another Russian offensive has begun in the northeast of the country. Joining us now live from Kyiv is our correspondent, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. Now, what can you tell us about the latest on this new Russian offensive?
Good evening. Well, this report came from Alexander Syrsky, Ukraine's commander-in-chief. He had a media meeting, an interview with LP, a media outlet, Ukrainian one. This is one of the quotes. He said, "For several days, almost a week, we've been observing almost a doubling of the number of enemy attacks in all main directions." And he went on to point that the directions that they are, this new offensive is coming in the north of Ukraine, in Sumy and Kharkiv. Now, this is quite important because Sumy and Kharkiv are not among those regions that Russia has illegally annexed of Ukraine. So these are areas that Russia had largely occupied at the start of the conflict. So far from moving towards some sort of ceasefire on the current lines of conflict, Russia is planning to move into even more oblasts that they're currently not in, further into Ukrainian territory. That's according to the assessment of the commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky. Now, there has been a lot of attacks on Ukraine from Russia over the last few days. One person killed, 34 people injured. President Zelensky has made another plea today in his statement, his nightly address, called for more Patriot systems from the West, saying Ukraine needs at least 10 systems that are effective enough against Russian ballistic missiles, one that tragically killed 20 people in Kyiv in central Ukraine over the weekend. The Patriots do this best. We have spoken repeatedly with the American side, with everyone in Europe who is able to help. We are counting on the solution. So Zelensky there really putting pressure on his allies to step up in the field of air defense to prevent more of those scenes that you're seeing on your screen now from happening week in, week out here in Ukraine. The need for more air defenses is critical going forward, whether or not this ceasefire agreement moves any further forward between the United States and Russia.
Well, hopefully the U.S. administration can see that Vladimir Putin is escalating the situation. Oz Chatterjee reporting for us from Kyiv. Thank you for that. Protests against the arrest of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu are picking up again in Turkey as the Muslim holiday of Ramadan ends. We're now joined by our correspondent in Istanbul, Kazimierz Wisiak, who's present at the rally of the opposition party, CHP. Good evening, Kazimierz. Now, what's happening there now? How big is this demonstration?
Good evening, Dawn. This demonstration is definitely massive. It is in fact so massive that we had to move far away from the protest. So perhaps the images you see behind me don't really convey that. We've managed to send over a few pictures before we had to move away, but there are still people coming over in front of the municipality office building in the center of Istanbul. These protests, as you've mentioned, are in connection with the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul, who announced his the president for the elections, which are still a few years away. He is arrested on charges of corruption. He is still detained, and his trial is about to begin in a matter of days. Now, the people have come out here to protest, to show their support to the CHP opposition party. I've managed to speak with one of the officials from this group, so let's listen to what he had to say.
Today, we are in Şişli because also the mayor of Şişli from our party was arrested in the very same day with İmamoğlu. Now people are coming together and are going to protest the government and the judiciary system.
Well, thanks for that insight into the rally. It looks quite numerous now. But what about not only is the protest there taking place, but tomorrow the United States and Russian officials are meeting there. Can you tell us what this meeting will be all about?
Certainly, there will be a meeting, as confirmed by the Kremlin and the White House, taking place here in Istanbul on April 10th. And this meeting will be between foreign officials of the two countries, and officially the topic of discussions will be the works of embassies of these two countries. However, there are, of course, questions whether the two sides will be discussing Ukraine and the peace process, which so far we haven't seen the ceasefire, as Russia continues to refuse the terms proposed by Washington. Ukraine, of course, having agreed to these terms. Now, the U.S. State Department spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, has said that quote, Ukraine will absolutely not be on the agenda, but, you know, we are not capable of telling whether they will be discussing this. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said earlier this month that the two sides, US and Russia, have talked about the peace process secretly. So whether this meeting will be about that and whether the spokesperson is just throwing us off, well, we just don't know. What we do know is that the peace is still nowhere to be seen. So we have to be on the lookout whether this latest series of meetings between US and Russian officials can bring to this fire.
That's right. Well, Kazimierz Wysiak, do stay safe there in Istanbul, and thank you for your report. In Germany, intense negotiations over 6 weeks have brought lightning-fast coalition agreement. The next coalition will likely be formed between the conservative CDU, CSU, and center-left SPD, with Friedrich Merz at the helm as chancellor. The new government will be faced with daunting tasks such as vast investments in defense, dealing with the economic fallout of Trump's tariffs, and immigration. Sasha Farbach reports.
In record time and just after 6 weeks of intense talks, the conservative CDU-CSU and center-left SPD have reached an agreement. A coalition deal that will shape Germany's next government seems set. From a focus on defense, tougher migration to finance, there is agreement to form a new government. CDU leader Friedrich Merz was confident at Wednesday's announcement of the coalition partners.
The
coalition agreement now before us is the result of intensive consultations and negotiations. Above all, however, it is a very strong and clear sign to the citizens of our country. And it is also a clear signal to our partners in the European Union. Germany will have a strong government capable of taking action.
Friedrich Merz has swiftly brought together a new coalition between his CDU-CSU conservatives and the center-left SPD. Just 6 weeks after the February snap elections and with rising geopolitical pressures, policymakers have moved quickly to establish a government. Experts believe this new alliance will provide a steady direction for Berlin.
That means we are going to see continuity when it comes to defense. Boris Pistorius is most likely going to stay on, and that means that he will oversee the surge in German defense spending. And Lars Klingbeil, the head of the Social Democrats, is poised to become the finance minister, so he will manage Germany's finance.
Even amid coalition talks, Merz pushed through major reforms, including a debt overhaul that required a constitutional change. This move will see billions for infrastructure and will bolster Germany's defense industry, preparing the nation for the challenges ahead.
The coalition agreement is a signal of new beginnings and a powerful sign for our country. The political center of our country is in a position to solve the problems we are facing. The future government, the future coalition will reform and invest in order to keep Germany stable, make it more secure, and make it economically stronger again. And Europe can also rely on Germany.
Und auch Europa kann sich auf Deutschland verlassen.
Germany will foster closer ties with key allies like Poland and France. One of Merz's first trips will likely be to Warsaw to coordinate with Poland's government. With an unpredictable transatlantic partnership and growing demands on Europe, experts believe the new coalition is primed to respond more swiftly, especially when it comes to foreign policy.
Foreign policy will largely be steered by the Chancellery, and the Foreign Ministry, for the first time in 60 years, will be run by conservatives. And that really shows how centralized the foreign policy will be. But again, in these times of crisis, that's good news for those caring about a Germany that is able to act and act quickly.
Although the coalition agreement has come together in record time, some experts believe that there could be tension in migration policy, which is set to become much tougher.
Little that stands out other than the migration and the question of when and how will illegal migrants, asylum seekers, be rejected or pushed back at the German border. This, I think, is the most critical point.
The next step is for the political groups to vote on the agreement, and if approved, Friedrich Merz could be elected Chancellor by German MPs in early May. All this swift political action could signal a new era of efficiency for the incoming government. Sascha Farbach, TVP World.
Now we go to the global trade war launched by U.S. President Donald Trump. Today, a 104% tariff went into effect on Chinese goods. In response, China upped that game again by placing an additional levy on American goods, now totaling 84%. And the U.S. swiftly fired back, making it 125% on Chinese goods, effective immediately. Meanwhile, the EU has announced retaliatory tariffs on $23 billion worth of U.S.-made goods, which target red states and include items such as soybeans, motorcycles, and orange juice. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Dahmen, brings us the latest.
Washington and Beijing going tit for tat on tariffs.
They've ripped us off left and right. But now it's our turn to do the ripping. That's okay.
We will continue to take firm and forceful measurements to safeguard our legitimate rights and interests.
A staggering standoff is now in play, with the US putting 104% on Chinese imports, China hitting back with duties of 84%, then President Donald Trump lifting the ceiling again, authorizing a 125% tariff. He maintains his phone is otherwise ringing off the hook.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir.
Trump's tariff crackdown has technically taken effect, including 25% on imported vehicles and a baseline 10% hit on most countries, with the European Union facing double. But as we go to air tonight, Trump has announced a 90-day pause for those who have not retaliated against the US. EU members earlier agreed to retaliate with 25% levies from next Tuesday on products like steel and aluminium, tobacco and poultry. But these are just baby steps as Europe weighs a broader response.
Trump is alienating their allies, with this more hostile policy. Let's say Ukraine, let's say trade, So you need to diversify. You need to look for other partners, and China could be a feasible partner in some specific areas.
Beijing and Brussels have often been at odds, but now faced with a common foe. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen held a phone call with Chinese Premier Li Qiang to call for a strong trading system and get ahead of a possible diversion of cheap Chinese goods to Europe. Across the Atlantic, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is warning against aligning with the Asian superpower.
That would be cutting your own throat, because I can tell you that these Chinese exports that the U.S. tariff wall is going to keep out, that China, for all of you who can remember that Disney movie of the brooms carrying the buckets of water, that is a Chinese business model. It never stops.
On Wednesday, Italy's right-wing Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni met with King Charles in Rome. Next week, she'll be heading to Washington to sit down with President Trump himself. Meloni is reportedly coordinating the visit with Brussels, but some are nervous her solo trip might impact Europe's negotiating power. So could EU member states really end up haggling independently with Trump to end their own tariff pain?
I think that would be very dangerous. I think if we allow that, then we will see very quickly this race to the bottom. I think we already see it in Italy, when the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is suggesting that she could maybe cut a deal with Donald Trump. And yes, if she could cut a deal for whole Europe, that would be good.
An ultimate question of unity at a time of tariff turmoil. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
We are just a few days into a global trade war unleashed by U.S. President Donald Trump. And today the EU fired back with retaliatory tariffs on some American goods. Still, it's a far cry from the constantly escalating U.S.-China trade war, with the U.S. imposing 104% tariffs on Chinese goods, and the latter imposed 34%. Today, China upped that game by another 50%, and now the United States making it 125% effective immediately. And now joining me to discuss what this means for the global and European economies and the EU's negotiation strategy is former Polish Finance Minister Paweł Wojciechowski. Sir, thank you very much for joining us tonight here on World News Tonight.
I'm glad to be here. It's an interesting topic.
It is, and we had a lot of last-minute developments, actually, that just transpired a few moments ago, literally. It looks like for many countries, Trump has announced a 90-day pause on tariffs. Does this make his strategy? I know we were all guessing on his strategy. What is it that Donald Trump wants to achieve? Does this shed some light on his potential strategy?
I think that nobody knows. I'm not sure if President Trump knows exactly where he's getting. Maybe he knows. He's calling himself a great negotiator, and he puts a lot of things on the table. He likes to talk one by one with everyone. Some of them are, if countries are trying to escalate and retaliate, he would escalate. He does like a threat of escalation. And some other countries, like European Union, is trying to be kind of on the mild side, trying to kind of maneuver to find a way to negotiate between Šefčovič, which is the commissioner, and Lutnik, which is the responsible for trade and trade negotiations. So the trade negotiations may come in the phase where there would be a jockeying position, because we are moving into what we call uncharted waters. And I use this diplomatic jargon, of variable geometry, with a lot of players, So what is happening between the EU and the US is also affected by what's happening between the US and China, because if there would be very high tariffs among those two countries, then some of the trade would be diverted to the European Union, and then we would have to bring in other measures. So it's all very complicated.
That's still very much a possibility, is it not? I mean, if the United States and China continue to escalate this, the World Trade Organization has said U.S.-China trade could drop by as much as 80%.
Yeah, with those type of tariffs that are being announced today, yes. And you've heard the situation even before under the Biden administration. I remember in May last year, that was in the increase of tariffs for electrical vehicles from China to almost 100%, I think 100%. And then Europe had to come with some ideas how to countermeasure the potential flow of cars into Europe. And and use the article. Some people say it's conforming to the WTO rules, and some say, well, it's not. China is questioning that.
but impose tariffs on electric vehicles from China as well. So it's all the game of a lot of variables, and of course there is a lot of economic effects like happening, potential deflation in Europe. Some people say maybe I doubt about it, depending on the measures that Europe will take against the United States and other countries, and inflationary pressure in the United States. So a lot of elements, not only related to the trade war, but also to what we call it the monetary wars, potentially, that may happen in the world, which is a very difficult potential situation that may cause, global crisis.
Absolutely. I think the development of this 90-day pause is going to allow us to negotiate. Actually, Europe should take a back seat and let this U.S.-China dispute kind of spiral out of control. It puts Europe, I think, in a better situation.
But I think that we did a little bit, in a way that Chinese were very eager to announce something, retaliatory measures. They were prepared. The decision, in China being taken very fast. In Europe, has to be negotiated deal. And now it's, of course, it's an exclusive policy of the European Commission, according to the voting, majority voting of the member states. 26 approve those countermeasures. One country did not approve, which is Hungary. But of course, it's taken. Its unity has been shown, and of course, every element is in place. Now, we're talking about, measures that are being applied now next week, next May, which is a bigger chunk of the tariffs, and then in December, like for example for soybeans, at the end, So, but some of the elements of these countermeasures were not taken into account. For example, there was discussion about whiskey from the United States. If we put too much tariffs on the alcohol, then the French and Italian wine producers were threatened to have 200% of tariffs. So, right. so there was a big discussion of which elements of those products we should apply.
Right, and 26 billion, I'd say that's or 23 billion.
23, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. Now, there are decisions that are made by the European Union, but some decisions are still within the competencies of nation states within the EU, and such as, say, increasing corporate income taxes on certain entities or certain businesses. Do you think that certain European countries might retaliate in this form, for instance, targeting U.S. tech companies?
I think that what is on the table is preparedness of Europe based on regulations, which was thought, anti-China regulation at the time, to limit the expansion of geek techs, and there was discussion about, big geek tech companies or telecom companies from China, and also on some investments that China wanted to do in Europe in critical infrastructure. So all those measures could be taken, and for example, vis-a-vis the United States, there's this possibility to limit the procurement addressed to the U.S. companies. That's one thing. Second element is to impose, this is the biggest threat, impose some kind of, start working on some kind of, digital tax, which of course stays in the.
But this is the nuclear option.
This is the nuclear option. I've read on the platform X, one of the very important persons from the close to President Trump saying, if you impose those taxes, we will exit NATO. So this is a big, of course, but some countries in Europe already have this type of tax. Of course, geek techs companies, are very afraid of that, but we must remember that the US has a surplus in services.
Yeah.
And that relates actually to, even this iPhone, I have it here. Think it's a product, but in terms of global value chain and value added, it's 60% services. You may not know it, but most people don't think about it. But actually, there's a lot of services in some of the things that are being offered, all the...
Right. When you put goods and services
you
together,
put it together, that's a different story. Plus, if you look at the global value chain, you cannot come back to the 19th century idea of manufacturing, doing shirts and trousers, Right. But think about all the global value chains in which you create value. And it happens that the United States, it's usually as a U-curve. You have in the invention, when you put a lot of innovation, you have a high value added. Then you have manufacturing, like in Poland, you assembly line of cars or computers or whatever, and there's a lower value added. And then, of course, the distribution, there's a high value added. So the United States has a privilege in this global value chain to have a high value added. And therefore, it's benefiting from trade of high value added. We don't benefit that much as Poland. And I think that we have to go to basics.
Yep.
It's a wrong policy to raise tariffs.
Right. Well, we'll have to see how this pans out. We have a 90-day grace period to negotiate, so let's see where this leads. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Paweł Wojciechowski, former Polish finance minister. And that's all from us here on World News Tonight. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned to TVP World, because On the Record with Adam Yasser is coming up next.